Welcome to Inside the Firm, a podcast dedicated to small business owners and hosted by entrepreneurs, Alex Gore and Lance Cayko. Each week, they take you on their journey of how to start, run, and grow a business by bringing you inside their architecture and real estate development firm. Get a behind-the-scenes tour of how these business leaders manage their clients and foster company culture while creating new and innovative projects. And now your hosts, Alex Gore and Lance Cayko.
All right, welcome to a special edition of Inside the Firm. I'm here with Taylor Ryan, and Taylor Ryan he's a mentor, a startup junkie, technical marketer, growth hacker, 5-time CEO of previous startups, CMO of Valuer.ai, published author, and contributor to Entrepreneur.com, lecturer on startup and innovation, University of Copenhagen, Copenhagen Business School, Talent Garden, and Google. 11 years digital marketing experience, grew up in Washington, D.C., but currently living in Copenhagen, Denmark. What did I miss, Taylor?
I think you nailed it. Yeah, we hit all the fine parts. So, thanks for the introduction.
Well, my favorite part about you so far is that you are you're a startup junkie. I think Alex and I resonate with that a lot. We are also, we like to call ourselves, maybe I'm going to steal that from now on, a startup junkie, but we like to refer to ourselves as serial entrepreneurs because it's like edgy, right? You think of serial killer, but like, no, we're just serial entrepreneurs. We, instead of serially killing people, we're serially starting things up over and over again. So what kind of led you to be a startup junkie?
Yeah, I think, everybody kind of has the push against what would be the ordinary way. And sometimes that's things that we can control. And sometimes it's things that I had zero control over. I graduated at the height of the economic recession. So I graduated in 2008 with a degree in psychology, which basically means I can either work with old people with dementia or very young children, or stay in school for another 8 years. So it was kind of one of those things where nobody was willing to give me a shot. So eventually I kind of had to align myself with entrepreneurs that were just running off of fumes and depleted resources and gave me a chance.
Tell me, what is the first example of that? Because you're of how you jumped into somebody giving you a chance. Like, is there a notable story that you could tell us? Because
sure. Yeah, there's half a dozen of these. One of my favorites was, my main job right after graduation that I was doing full time. I was selling barrels, like whiskey, American white oak barrels up and down the East Coast to wineries and distilleries. And on the weekends, I would either be selling them at Renaissance fairs or Italian festivals or Celtic festivals. I even did a pirate festival. So any way that I could find a side hustle in order to make that work kind of on the week and on the weekend, I was doing it. It was the first time that I had gotten a chance to put my hands on something like a dropship model. And so I ended up scaling their business quite well using all kinds of bizarre websites that you would never expect to be very into barrels. So I kind of got exposed to this, let's make hay while the sun is shining and figure out the best possible way in order to do more with less. That's
awesome. There's got to be, so you're obviously heavy into the tech side of sales and everything, but what I wanted to kind of steer back to your psychology degree. To me, one of the biggest things about sales is, and being a good salesman or a saleswoman is you putting yourself in somebody else's mind when, it's a potential sale or a customer, and really listening to them. That's one of the things we strive for. So surely your psychology background has to play into the sales and what you're doing. Maybe it's even like one of the main steering points. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. I've always said in terms of growth hacking that there's probably a mix of kind of the scientific method, some of this user psychology or psychology in general, and then kind of this element of tech. And using my background within psychology, I've been able to get my hands into all kinds of different unique experiments that probably most folks wouldn't think to do, or maybe it just hadn't occurred. But when I was first starting out, I think most people looked upon psychology as maybe on a par with a history degree, or maybe more of a liberal arts kind of thing. But I see a direct correlation, especially when you're using tech to do anything from user testing to try to nail down your ideal customer profile. All of these things come into play, and it's so interesting to get to use these things that I always thought were fun to learn, but never actually equatable to the real world. And of course, when you start playing with marketing as well as sales, you really do uncover some real fun opportunities to kind of go back to the stuff that is psychology principles and all that fun stuff.
Yeah, I don't think anybody, especially any kind of background that you have when it just comes to human interaction is critical for being a good salesman. So it's interesting, like when we go after, I mean, Alex and I have this very A to B trajectory. We're totally geared towards what we do, our architecture, development, and literally building stuff. But there's all these other, books that we read, like the Lean Startup, or one of the best ones that I've ever read is How to Win Friends, How to Win Friends and Influence People, right? So that's all about the psychology and meeting people, and it's been critical in what we do. So I don't know.
Dale Carnegie, it's a great book, yeah.
The more holistic you can be as a person, I think the better salesman and the better entrepreneur you're going to be, right? I mean, just as many ways as you can get your tentacles out there. Tell me about this term growth hacker. It's like another millennial term we're throwing out, right? Life hacks, growth hacker. That is interesting.
Sure. I think growth hacker has evolved over time, and it started as this kind of fun buzzword. It is essentially the idea of breaking apart a system and hacking it in a way that allows you to do more with less. And I've considered that to be kind of the cornerstone of what's allowed me to do a lot more with very minimal resources. Some call it bootstrapping. I like the word growth hacker, but I've met a ton of marketers that steer away from that. And I think we have in at least the marketing scene, there's a divide. There's those that deem themselves to be branding and strategists that love to talk with their eyes closed and wear black turtlenecks. And I think there's more of the growth hackers that are into getting their hands dirty and actually doing the work to understand why did something work that way, or what was the result inside of my experiment that got so much explosive growth, and how do I duplicate that again on something else? And I think there's definitely a divide within the marketing world of those that can understand how to growth hack and those that use it on a resume in order to get a job.
Do you think it's an age difference? I mean, because it sounded like a generational difference. What you just described to me was a big difference that we see in the architecture and construction industry is you got a lot of people under 40 who get the internet, they get social media, and they get volume-based production versus percentage-based construction. And then you've got this crowd that's maybe over 40, over 50. They don't understand that architecture is a business and you should be marketing yourself online. Do you think there's anything to that, or do you think that's just me blowing smoke?
Oh, absolutely. A fantastic question. It's one of those things that I dabbled in construction project management software for about a year and a half ago. And it was really fascinating to get to meet exactly what you're describing, which is this generational divide within an industry that hasn't really embraced technology. And when I say technology, I don't mean larger mechanical machines. What I'm talking about is software. If you're looking at whether it's the architecture industry or construction, and you're looking at how you're running your business, I mean, the materials aren't getting any cheaper in terms of price. Lumber's not going down and the cost. It's certainly not getting any cheaper to employ people from a labor standpoint. So the only thing that you can really improve upon these days is the optimization of your processes. And the only way that I really know how to do that is to start bringing on tools, the software that does the job for you, whether it's data collection or something in the way of the management of the project or a collaboration tool. All of this is very possible. And there are so many different firms that I've talked to, whether it's architects or construction folks, that are like, look, we have our own way of doing this. It's that not in my backyard type of thing. And I'll never understand why that's kind of taking over in the scene. Is I refuse to use something that I don't understand. Therefore, I'm going to bury my head into the sand until this goes away. And it won't. It's only going to get more and more difficult to really integrate with a lot of these great tools.
Yeah, change is inevitable, right? I mean, that's literally it. Like the only thing that's constant is change. It's hilarious to me. that people don't embrace it. Like, you got to get on board or get off, or you're just going to get thrown off, which kind of brings me to tell us about Architecture Quote and how does it work? I was honestly mystified. So I'm even interested to understand, how does this work? Maybe for like a small firm architect who they're a 1 or 2 person shop. They've all of a sudden got this inquiry for this very large project and they need to manage it from top to bottom. Should they be going to a place like your website there?
Sure. So when I first moved to Copenhagen, the first friends that I met were architects. And to be totally honest, I actually had never met an architect in person prior to coming to Denmark.
We're creatures. We're like you.
I suppose, it's a very different vocation, a very different type of job. But yeah, the things that I was seeing within kind of their day-to-day were very different from my own. Half of these people were being laid off every 6 months to a year because they were newer to their industry. And when projects are minimized or there aren't enough hours in a day to go around, they just lay people off. And I'd never seen that before. So when I started asking them, how are you guys getting leads? They're like, well, what's a lead? And I'm like, well, that's not a good sign. I'm like, new projects. And they go, word of mouth. And I'm like, yeah, but in 2000, at this point, I think it was 2017. But even still, I dug a little deeper and started looking through not only the user experience of some of the architecture websites, but then trying to dig further beyond that and say, what kind of ways are you automating this? And they weren't doing any of it. I think it's a very old school industry that goes off of a lot of relationships, but that's not the trends that I'm seeing with any type of business partnership these days. There's so much more that can be done using data or using the World Wide Web, the internet, So like the idea is very simple with Architecture Quote. It's deal flow software. So we basically aggregate leads from 3 different areas. One is organic, directly through our website, and we basically give people the opportunity to get a free quote. They basically put in a few different fields of data, like the size, number of floors, complexities, and they get a free quote right on the spot, and then we give them a chance to build that project within our platform. The other 2 areas are simple. We aggregate them. There are global tenders that are happening on a daily basis, whether it's within Europe, North America, but if you are an international firm or you're a small one and you want to compete on a larger scale, where are you finding this stuff? And a lot of people are still doing this word of mouth thing. And the last one is basically freelance work. There are tons of freelance sites that are very easy to aggregate using a couple of Python scripts to continue to serve people up stuff. So the idea is, don't lay off Bart or my friend Gemma, find another project for them to keep the thing going. That's kind of the idea in a nutshell. It's deal flow, collaboration.
Yeah, I love it. Two things you reminded me of is one was a story when I first moved to Boulder County in Colorado. I worked on Pearl Street, and it was one of the last internships in Colorado. I guarantee it, because it looks like we graduated at the same time. I think 2008. You and I. So Alex and I were also coming out, trying to enter the workforce in the Great Recession, just the worst time to enter, especially in the architecture industry. Construction industry, 50% of the people got laid off. Anyway, the firm, I lasted there about 9 months before everything really took a crap, and then the bottom fell out. So, but I was trying my best to secure my position in a very small firm, 4 people or less, by so there was government work, and one of my cousins had a lead there, and I remember being in a marketing meeting with him and the bigwigs over who are able to get these government contracts and then solicit architects. And they asked that exact same question that you asked. Where are you getting your leads? And it was like deer in the headlights. I mean, it was scary. And I was thinking, for me to see this as an employee who is basically beholden to an employer as far as job security, I mean, I have very little control, right? So that was an eye-opener for me of like, I think so. It's kind of. So I want you to know that this is an international problem, an old school architect international problem of, man. I think, and then you're seeing it. The second thing you made me think of is, we have a lot of millennials that are now hiring us, and how are they finding architects? they're not going through word of mouth, right? Because we're all on our phones, we're all texting, we're all on the internet, it's all digital. So you're seeing like two things happening at once. If this old guard is sort of going the wayside because they aren't keeping up with where the inquiries are from, and they refuse to change. This is your website is phenomenal. I hope it works out for you and grows because it has a lot of potential.
Well, I appreciate that. Yeah, I figure it is time to try to get something in the way of a foot in the door to either impress upon those that are open to change, because I'm never going to change everybody. There's no chance. And one of the most fascinating things, having done this within the project management side of construction, is essentially watching some of these bigger players go out of business. And it's not because they're smarter and have more experience. It's because they're stubborn and they don't want to change, and they think the world will continue to evolve around them. And that's not the world that we're living in. And it's so incredible. Like, you want to grab them and shake them and be like, listen, there's so many different ways that you can improve this. You don't have to do this. And instead of going with what is potentially this evolution, they want to dig their heels in. And the reality is, give it 5 years, give it 10 years, and you will start to see these smaller millennial firms that are more agile, more flexible, that are more adaptive to the market. And these are the ones that are going to get ahead. That's happening now. Mm-hmm. And it's so shocking to see these dinosaurs that are like, look, I've already made all my money. I know how to do this. And it's like, cool, watch in 5 years.
Yeah.
And that's the world that they're going to end up being in. It's crazy.
And wait till we start to automate a lot more of the labor, right? And we'll get to that. That's one of my later questions is I want your take on Alex and I are sort of futurists. We try to look ahead at bleeding edge technology and then obtain it and own it once it becomes cutting edge. I think bleeding edge is always dangerous, right? Before we get into that, let's go back to tell me about Valuer. So that you're the CMO of Valuer.ai. It's a startup radar. What is that exactly? What does that mean? Unpack that for us.
Sure. So Valuer essentially connects startups with corporations. It's under this same idea of digitalization or corporate innovation. The concept is very simple. Take a look at Toys R Us and some of these more recent innovative disasters or catastrophes where you have large companies that are getting eaten up, death by 1,000 cuts. The concept is very simple. A gentleman by the name of John Chambers, he's the former CEO of Cisco, recently came out and said, look, within the next 10 years, it's something to the effect of 40% of large corporations that are on the Fortune 500 will be irrelevant in the next 10 years if they do not start working with startups. The idea is that they're too slow in terms of being able to innovate and change direction like startups are. Unfortunately, startups are already taking a lot of the opportunities away from these folks because they're able to iterate, they're able to change. They have this minimum viable product, as you just mentioned, the lean startup method, and it works. The other side of it is they're driven and they're passionate. You can never put a passionate person next to somebody that's just doing it as a job. They don't care enough.
Right.
And that's sometimes what it comes down to. So I've been front row and center to see a lot of these amazing companies that are struggling to keep up with the scene around them. They're seeing, these amazing unicorns spring up overnight, and they're like, how come we don't have that unicorn money? Look at any of the top 10 companies within the United States alone. All of them are tech companies. Mm-hmm. What happened to the guys that were on top 5, 10, 15 years ago? That's the world that we're living in, and it's happening right now, and people don't realize it's on our doorstep, and most won't get it until it's too late.
Yeah. It's so good to talk to somebody that's just optimistic about, entrepreneurship, capitalism in the future. Honestly, like our generation, I feel like the media paints a totally different picture. And I am just so optimistic about everybody's ability to kind of lift themselves out of nowhere, especially like your story. You graduated like us, same time, really not a lot of opportunity, but there's so much hustle available. Especially if a lot of people don't even have to go the 4-year route anymore. You could go the 2-year route or just no route and do some online learning stuff like through lynda.com, all these sort of things. Like, get on the wave, people. I think,
I agree. It's funny. I'm teaching a course over at a place called Talent Garden. It used to be called Rainmaking, but I'm teaching a 6-week course about growth hacking. And, I continue to kind of field questions about this when people are asking me if they should take the course. And I'm not incentivized by any means. I'm already kind of outside of that. But the idea is that, the stuff that you probably picked up along the way, and myself as well, it's learned by doing. And it's a lot of these hard-learned lessons that make you a much better entrepreneur, a much better business person, much better marketer. And these are things that, unfortunately, there is no quick fix. It's getting your face smashed into the mud and deciding whether or not you want to get up and do it again. And maybe we're crazy people, but I do enjoy a bit of, the fight. And I think that's the fun part of being in this environment, is saying, I like that underdog aspect. I like getting a chance to prove people wrong. And consistently, that's what's gotten me out of bed in the morning, is having that rough start and saying, I'll show them,
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. That's exactly the bread and butter of our firm is, and the idea behind it is, we're going to show you guys, fine, we got kicked to the curb, but every day we're going to wake up and pretend we're broke. Sometimes we actually are, and hungry, and we're going to push a boulder up a mountain every single day. The challenge is like half of it. You're totally spot on. That's exactly what it gets. And so again, this is like you have two. I consider myself a Gillennial, like half Gen X, half millennial, right? Because we're like on that cusp. Maybe you're there too, because you get like if people talk to you and try to cite some like grunge music, I bet you could name the bands, right? That's fine.
Well, yeah, sure.
So that's why I consider myself a Gillennial. But really talking about millennials, that's one other topic. I mean, we've said that word a couple times, but if you talk to the generation above us, the 2 generations above us, I think that's the consensus is, they're lazy, they're still in mom and dad's basement. But here you have two people right now showing, telling their stories, and it's quite the opposite. Like, they really enjoy the challenge. So tell us about millennials, in your opinion. Like, why is our generation different? Some people say the negative stuff about job hopping, ghosting, motivations. What is your take on our generation? Like, what you're at the core of it.
Sure. I love the phrase ghosting, by the way. I think that's fantastic. I've only done it once, but there's so many great articles that have come out about it, because it is so counter to previous generations. The concept of getting up and walking out, or never even showing up for the first day because F those guys, that wasn't even a real offer. I'm not going to stand for it. There is something inherently very different about this generation. And I think there's a grand spectrum of this, that the idea of everybody from a single year or even a single generation having all the same attributes and abilities is very bizarre and naive, and obviously not fair. I've met both sides of the spectrum. I've met millennials that you could not motivate, and many of them I've had the pleasure of working with or working for. It's crazy. And I've also met the other side of people that are willing to go the extra mile because they care. And they found something in the way of a nuanced desire to be inspired, or something that gives them meaning. And they will continue to work all kinds of crazy hours to the bone until they get what they want. I do admire that. I have 30 people underneath me right now, and I got to tell you, it is a struggle to find motivations with everybody. But I think that's part of the charm, is understanding like, okay, this person is not motivated by attaboys or way to go. So money isn't it either. So I got to find something that they are engaged with. What is interesting to you?
A passion.
And that's a weird thing that most people never really considered as like, what do you care? Go to your desk, it's not a thing. But now you have to kind of hit these people as more or less human beings and really uncover the psychology of what brought them to your doorstep or next to you in order to get them to deliver. And I think that's so difficult with a generation that has so many bizarre stereotypes. And of course, many of them are true. But I don't think you can't shoehorn everybody that exists between this year and this year as like, you're all the same. I just don't think it's fair.
Yeah, I don't think it is either. I like to call it passionate capitalism. like you have to tie the passion with the want to go out there and make money and make a living and feed yourself and your family and everything. Like we try to do at least 1 year review, and during those with employees, when they first start out, sometimes it's like a 30 to 90 day review and then another 6 month review. But we don't do it traditionally in the sense that, one of the big questions we ask them is like, is there anything that you're not satisfied with as far as a project typology? Like, what is your passion? How do we help you with your passion so that we can fulfill that by the next time we meet again, and that you're happy and you want to be, like, you want to come to work, you lose track of time such that, like, it's 5 o'clock and everybody looks around. And this happens quite often at our firm, is like people look around and they go, oh my God, it's 5, I got to get out of here. I totally spaced out the day. That's where it's at. Well, I think if it's anything I could dissuade from the stereotypes, it's, well, maybe you guys need to understand, the other generations who are hiring millennials, that's what they're looking for, is they want to tie the passion to the capital and the capital investment that you're putting into them.
I'd love to add on to that if that's all right. I tend to find that people are really into working at Valuer because I'm giving them a lot more than what I'm taking out. I do learning lessons twice a week these days. So basically, it's a big team, but I teach design, UX, a mixture of growth hacking, SEO, amplification, all these different techniques. And I don't care if you are a videographer or a content writer, I still feel like it's relevant. And I don't know if you can tell by my voice, but I'm really into this stuff. And I think people quit bad bosses, not necessarily bad jobs. Yeah. So if your boss is a micromanager and really they barely remember your name, much less how they feel about you one way or the other, then I think you lose a big element of motivation from people that are, hey, this is my time too, and that's, I think, a really difficult thing to kind of charge people up. I talk to everybody that's around me as people that are my peers, not necessarily like, hey, peasant, I told you to go do this, it's crazy. But I have so many experiences of god-awful bosses, and I'm sure you have as well, that it's battle-hardened need to know, no matter what, I'm never going to put somebody through that. I'm never going to tell you, you're too dumb to be at this job. You're too dumb to think, because somebody hasn't had their coffee and they're a little grumpy. There's a million different ways that I think you have to tie in this emotional intelligence with a generation that unfortunately is, a lot more emotional.
Yep.
And that can be a motivator if done correctly.
If done correctly, exactly. Why not try to harness that instead of looking at it as a negative? You had the little statement there of like, it's unfortunate. It's hard to like untie that emotional character that we sort of have and everything. Let's move to, I have one big question, one sort of big ending question. And then I'd also like to, at the end, tell us how people can follow you and get in touch with you and learn more about you and keep up with you. But this is a big one for anybody that's kind of forward-looking, like you and I are, and Alex, is tell us about your how you envision the future of architectural design and the construction industry as it pertains to automation and 3D printing. Should we be worried or excited? Like, should we be Luddites or should we be pumped about it? I'm pumped about it personally.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I've written a number of pieces kind of about what is coming in terms of just BIM alone, right? Building information modeling. The idea is that you're able to tie in these other dimensions, time, right? Resources and data, and then the future. So think of a perfect situation that essentially allows you to capture data at every stop of the way, whether that's the way that you're building and you're able to say, look, with this much length and drywall, this will be this amount of money in terms of the expense of the materials, and it will cost X amount per a labor person to actually put this up. And on a grand enough timeline, if we are able to capture enough data, we can say, you got to deliver this ahead of this in order to make sure these guys are on site at the right time. Therefore, you don't have to bake in all of these extra costs within your plans. And you're able to have these amazing margins for a little while people are trying to catch up to all of this machine learning. I hate using the word artificial intelligence, but I think there's some really amazing stuff coming down the pike if you're willing to open yourself up to it. I do think that a lot of the stuff with AR and VR is mostly BS. I just don't see people getting super heavy into it. It's not a thing yet, and I visited a place that did, basically they had this entire room just for showing clients a lot of their VR stuff so they could walk through essentially the layout of their new hotel. The problem is, that's good to use once every 6 months, but you have an entire section of your office that is just for that. I just don't see that being scalable. And I'm sure that there are use cases for a million different ways to video capture with drones and then be able to throw on something in the way of an AR headset, like a HoloLens, to be able to see the different electrical behind walls. That's all well and good, but I still think that's 5 to 10 years out. So in the short term, I'm absolutely certain that better data management is going to be a huge difference maker. Accepting software as a tool and stop doing stuff the old way is a major milestone. And just some of the little things that you can start doing today is aggregate leads like a normal person. I mean, use a website like Architecture Quote or find another mechanism. There's a million out there.
Yeah.
But I absolutely believe that there is change coming, and it's not all bad. I think a lot of it's really exciting if you open yourself up to it.
If you open yourself up to it and harness it, exactly. Like if you just, right. I mean, that's really where it's at. Like I envisioned the day where I was actually working yesterday, shoveling gravel because we're building these condos right now with our current development. And I had this epiphany of, wow, I'm envisioning, what if we employed a ton of people who were handicapped or in wheelchairs, and they were out on construction sites, but all of a sudden now they're able to go on a construction site. They have a remote control and they can control this robot that's putting up drywall. That's where my mind goes. I'm like, no, we can empower all kinds of people that are not empowered because of the technology. Again, get on the wave or it's just going to knock you off. This has been an awesome conversation. I really appreciate it, Taylor. Tell us. End with, where can people follow you? How can they keep up with you? I know you're often a collaborator on entrepreneur.com, but what's the easiest way for people to get in touch with you if they like what they heard today?
Sure. I'm on LinkedIn. So if you look up Taylor Ryan, I think there's only one other Taylor Ryan in all of Denmark. So yeah, if you find the guy that's on Valuer, essentially the CMO of Valuer, you can connect with me on that. If you want to check out Architecture Quote and get signed up to be a beta tester, I'm excited to kind of get this thing launched in the next month. So it is functional, but I do want to actually meet some architects that want to try out the software behind kind of the walls. So that's architecturequote.com. And if you're at all interested in some of the stuff that I'm putting out for innovation or any of kind of this futuristic talk that we've kind of thrown out there, there's a ton of stuff that I put out on the blog of Valuer, and that's Valuer, spelled VALUER.ai, and maybe I can flip you a few links if it's all the same so people might be able to find it. Yeah,
we'll be sure to put them in the show notes. Awesome. Yeah. Well, thanks again for being on. This is we always, when we have guests on, it's like a special little episode. So there's a lot of really great, valuable talk. We'll have to have you back on, and check in with architecturequote.com. Maybe in like a year or so now from something and see our... I'd love to. Yeah. This is exactly what I wanted to get into. I love your industry, and I'm trying to kind of get my foot in the door. So thank you, Lance, for having me on. I'm really excited to kind of get this kind of stuff out there.